When you think about the actor translation, there's usually this underlying assumption that it is a purely mechanical process.
Right, like a straightforward exchange of goods.
Exactly. You look at a word for a tree in one language, you find the equivalent word in another, and the job is done. It is very functional.
Utilitarian, really. We generally prefer our language to be neatly categorized. It offers this comfortable clarity that doesn't ask too much of us.
Yeah, but that utilitarian approach works perfectly fine for instruction manuals or, grocery lists.
Oh, absolutely. But the moment you wade into mythology or folklore or deeply layered psychological storytelling, that simple binary act of translation just completely breaks down.
It really does. You stop dealing with simple labels and you start dealing with an emotional and linguistic landscape that carries an immense, sometimes overwhelming weight.
Because words can be dangerous, names, specifically, hold a terrifying amount of power.
Welcome to another deep dive. We are thrilled to have you sitting at the table with us today because we are looking at a narrative tapestry that is truly extraordinary.
It is a dense one today, for sure.
So today we have a fascinating, almost jarring stack of source materials in front of us. On one side, we have translated transcripts from a Hebrew video creator.
And this creator is delivering a very specific, impassioned, almost pleading message to their audience.
Right. It is all about the sheer importance of pronouncing one specific name correctly. And we are pairing those urgent quotes with a massive, emotionally devastating Japanese transcript.
A transcript that meticulously breaks down the most significant, tragic, and psychologically complex scenes from an animated series you might think you already...
Yeah, we are talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! Mang.
TX.
I mean, it is a juxtaposition that immediately demands your attention.
It really is. On the surface, you have this incredibly anxious plea about phonetics and pronunciation.
And on the other side, you have a detailed step analysis of a show that, to the casual observer is simply a vehicle for selling trading cards to children.
But our mission today is to completely shatter that surface-level assumption.
Completely. We are going to unpack the unexpected, deeply philosophical, and often grueling journey hiding inside this narrative.
We're exploring how this story uses the framework of a game to tackle profound themes of childhood trauma and the crushing, isolating burden of leadership.
Not to mention the horrifying realities of what happens when pure love becomes completely corrupted by pain.
And finally, we will get into the terrifying existential dread of transitioning into adulthood. So let's start with those Hebrew sources, because they really set the tone for everything.
They absolutely do.
The creator states, and I quote, "I hope you will be able to pronounce correctly the things I am saying."
And then they go on to say, the monster I am talking about is called Yubel. I am saying this because I don't know if you will say her name properly.
The sheer anxiety radiating from that statement is our first major clue about the depth of what we are dealing with.
Yeah, because in global mythology, folklore, and even deep-seated analytical psychology, to pronounce something's name correctly is never just about getting the syllables right.
No. It is about truly understanding that entity's fundamental nature.
Think about old fairy tales like Rumpelstiltskin or ancient magical traditions where knowing a demon's true name was literally the only way to hold power over.
Right, to know the name is to know the soul.
Exact. To mispronounce the name or to use it carelessly is to fundamentally misunderstand the entity we're dealing with.
So the creator isn't just worried about a linguistic error here. They are terrified that we, the audience, are going to misunderstand this monster named Yubel right from the very beginning.
They are begging us to see this entity clearly.
Which sets the perfect stage for our entire deep dive.
Because Yubel, as the massive Japanese transcript reveals piece by agonizing piece, is an entity that is tragically, catastrophically misunderstood by almost everyone in the story.
To understand who Yubel actually is and why this specific name carries such a heavy burden, we have to rewind the clock.
We have to look at a young boy named Judai.
Yeah, and we have to examine a childhood defined by an extreme, isolating loneliness.
The Japanese text gives us this critical backstory delivered by a character named Principal Samajima. He is shedding light on Judai's past, kind of pulling back the curtain on the cheerful protagonist.
According to the sources, young Judai was what we used to call a latch.
His parents were constantly away for work. He was left alone in an empty house day after silent day.
And to cope with that profound emptiness, to fill the void left by absent caregivers, he spent all his time playing card games with the neighborhood friends.
And his absolute favorite card, his prized possession, wasn't just a piece of cardboard. It was a spirit named Yubel.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Great.
Because what we're looking at here is a textbook, highly potent, coping mechanism.
Oh, absolutely. When primary caregivers are physically or emotionally absent, a child's psychological need for safety and attachment doesn't just evaporate.
Right, it seeks a new target.
Exact. The child will project those desperate needs onto whatever is available. Stuffed animal, an imaginary friend, or in this universe, a spirit residing inside a playing card.
But the text reveals quite quickly that this was not your standard, harmless, imaginary friend who sits the tea party.
No, this friend had
Big teeth.
Mm.
The transcript details that whenever young Judai dueled using the Yubel card, the neighborhood kids he was playing against would mysteriously fall ill.
And we aren't talking about a mild fever here. Some of these kids collapsed into sudden, inexplicable coma.
Which is terrifying. Naturally, the parents in the neighborhood grew absolutely terrified of this boy. Word spread, and soon everyone was too afraid to go near him.
Let alone play with him. So the one singular activity he used to connect with other human beings ended up being the very thing that isolated him entirely.
It reminds me of someone getting an overly aggressive guard dog. You feel so vulnerable living alone in a dangerous neighborhood, so you get this massive, terrifying dog to keep the burglars away.
Just so you can finally feel safe.
Right. But the dog lacks discernment. It ends up biting the mail carrier, the neighbors, your own friends who come to visit.
And suddenly, yes, you are perfectly safe from threats, but you are completely, devastatingly alone.
That is a highly illuminating way to frame the dynamic. Yubel functions as a toxic emotional defense mechanism.
Psychologically speaking, this monster isn't some random, twirling mustache villain who drops out of the sky with a grand plan for world domination.
No, Yubel is born directly from the boy's own profound, unprocessed loneliness and trauma.
The entity's sole purpose is to shield the child from the perceived pain of losing or being vulnerable. But in its aggressive overcorrection, it severs all of his ties to the outside world.
It creates a sterile, lonely fortress, which leads the narrative into what might be one of the most bizarre yet strangely poignant problem-solving attempts I have ever encountered in a story like this.
Oh, the space con.
Yes, the corporation that hosts these neighborhood card games, Kaiba Corporation, holds a special contest. They announce they are going to send a capsule filled with cards into outer space.
And the goal is so that they can absorb, quote, cosmic power.
Right. And young Judai, who is absolutely desperate to fix his isolating situation, begs his parents to submit his Yubel card for this spaceflight.
He specifically hopes that sending the card into the infinite cosmos will somehow imbue it with the power of justice.
He places Yubel in the capsule, along with another card he designed himself, a hero named Neos.
The psychological layering of this action is astounding when you take a moment to really look at it.
It really is. Think about the literal and metaphorical action taking place here. A vulnerable child is taking his deepest trauma, his volatile, dangerous imaginary protector, and he is launching it into the cold, infinite void of space.
He is hoping that the vast abstract universe will somehow fix his broken defense mechanism.
He wants the cosmos to grant it the power of justice so it stops hurting the people around.
It is the ultimate act of outsourcing one's emotional healing to an external, unknowable force.
It is genuinely heartbreaking. He doesn't want to throw his friend away. He doesn't hate Yubel.
No, he just desperately wants his friend to be good so they can finally play with others.
But as the text reveals, the cold void of space does not provide therapy. While the hero card he designed, Neos, was successfully born from this cosmic experiment, Yubel faced a very different fate.
Yeah, Yubel was exposed to a cosmic corrupting force referred to in the sources as the light of destruction.
This is the tragic, defining irony of Judai's child. By trying to outsource his healing, by trying to send the ugly, difficult parts of his psyche away, he didn't fix his protector.
He inadvertently radicalized.
He took his deepest, most vulnerable psychological defense and exposed it to an overwhelming, destructive force while it was completely isolated.
Instead of confronting and resolving his childhood trauma, he suppressed. He sent it as far away as physically possible, where it could mutate in the dark, completely unchecked.
And the mutation is terrifying. The transcript then leaps forward to Judai's teenage year. He is older, he is at a dueling academy, he has a solid group of friends.
But that suppressed past doesn't stay buried. It returns, and this time the stakes are not just neighborhood kids getting...
The stakes are the actual lives of his closest friends, which brings us into the alternate dimension arc, and a descent into psychological darkness that is incredibly heavy for the protagonist of this story.
We are moving away from the trauma of childhood isolation and stepping directly into the immense, crushing burden of leadership.
And the impossible expectations placed on anyone designated as a hero. The transcript drops us into a devastating high-stakes scenario.
Judai and his friends have been violently pulled into an alternate dimension. And this isn't a whimsical wonderland. It is a brutal, survival-style land.
The environment alone sounds punishing, but the internal landscape is even worse. The text highlights a specific moment where Judai is completely breaking down.
He is carrying the weight of everyone's survival on his shoulders, and he blames himself entirely for his friend Johan being left behind in a previous battle.
The quotes from the source material are dripping with a kind of crushing, paralyzing guilt. Judai says, "It's my fault. Leaving Johan behind is my responsibility."
He isn't sharing the blame. He is internalizing the entirety of the failure.
He is experiencing a total, catastrophic psychological collapse.
Because when the expectation to save absolutely everyone becomes too heavy, when you believe that any failure, any casualty is a direct indictment of your worth, the human mind simply cannot bear the load.
It fractures. And for Judai, this psychological fracture manifests as the birth of a shadow self.
A dark, totalitarian persona known in the text as the Supreme King, or How.
Wait, I have to pause us here and really interrogate this, because this is a massive leap. We're talking about a character who, up until this point, has been cheerful, upbeat, fiercely loyal to his friends.
Right.
How does that specific type of personality suddenly become the ultimate ruthless villain of his own story arc? How does a kid who just wanted to play games with his friends become a despot?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a brilliant and deeply unsettling execution of Jungian psychology. Carl Jung wrote extensively about the shadow.
That's the unconscious aspect of the personality that the conscious ego doesn't identify with.
Exactly. The Supreme King, How, is not a demonic possession by a foreign. That is crucial. How is a manifestation of extreme, cold, emotionally detached strength that Judai subconsciously believes he needs in order to survive.
Because in an alternate dimension governed strictly by the brutal law of survival of the fittest, his natural empathy feels like a fatal weakness.
His guilt feels like a death. So the mind's defense mechanism is to shut those.
How is a manifestation of a leader who decides that the only way to endure the pain of leadership is to become a ruthless dictator who feels absolutely nothing at all.
He becomes a tyrant simply to avoid feeling the agonizing pain of his own persona.
And the text details exactly how this new persona fights. He doesn't just overpower people. The mechanics of his strategy are deeply symbolic.
He relies heavily on a card called Super Polymerization.
Yeah, for those unfamiliar with the mechanics of this game, a standard fusion card lets you combine two of your own monsters to make a stronger one. But Super Polymerization is different.
Very different. The text states he uses it to forcefully fuse his opponent's monsters. He takes their spirits, their lives, without their consent, and absorbs them to fuel his own impenetrable power.
The mechanics of that card perfectly mirror his psychological state. He is consuming others to maintain an unfeeling armor.
He has completely lost his humanity in the desperate pursuit of absolute, unassailable strength. He believes that if he is strong enough, no one else can ever be lost, never have to feel guilt.
This raises an incredibly poignant, uncomfortable question for anyone listening right now. Think about the pressures in your own life.
When the pressure to succeed at your job or the pressure to relentlessly provide for and support your family becomes overwhelming, do you ever find yourself shutting down your...
Do you ever catch yourself becoming a colder, more detached, strictly utilitarian version of yourself just to cope with the sheer weight of those expectations?
That emotional numbness, that ruthless efficiency at the cost, that is how...
It is deeply chilling when you map a fantasy trope directly onto everyday burnout and emotional detachment, and breaking him out of that state is shown to be a monumental, agonizing task.
It requires massive sacrifice from the very friends he was trying to protect.
The transcript details these brutal duels where his friends throw themselves into the line of fire to save his soul. First, we have a character named Jim Crocodile Cook.
Jim uses a monster called Dark Gaia. The mechanics of Dark Gaia are all about raw, overwhelming physical force. You fuse a fiend and a rock type to create this massive behemoth.
Jim fights with everything he has, trying to batter down the walls Judai has built, but he actually dies in the attempt. He gives his life trying to reach his friend.
Jim's attempt represents a very common but often flawed approach to helping someone who has walled themselves off. He tries to confront the darkness head-on with brute force.
He tries to smash through the emotional armor.
But when someone is in that deeply defensive, traumatized state, direct opposition often just makes their walls thicker, or in Jim's case, it consumes the person trying to help.
The casualties of trying to break through someone's hardened emotional armor can be devastating. But then comes another friend, O'Brien.
And O'Brien observes Jim's failure and changes tactics entirely. He doesn't try to overpower the Supreme King. He plays a card called Volcanic Counter.
The specific mechanics here are vital. Volcanic Counter sits in the graveyard, which represents past damage or sacrifice, and when the opponent attacks, it triggers, inflicting the exact same amount of damage back onto the attacker.
O'Brien forces a tie. He purposefully sacrifices his own life points so that the immense destructive damage of Judai's own attack reflects right back into Judai's face.
And it is that mirrored reflection, taking the full brunt of his own violence, that finally shatters the dark persona gripping his...
The metaphor hidden within those card mechanics is profound. Sometimes you cannot talk someone out of destructive defense.
You cannot logic them out of it, and you cannot beat them out of it.
You have to reflect the damage they are causing right back, forcing them to intimately feel the reality of their own act.
O'Brien's sacrifice acts as an unyielding mirror.
Yeah.
It breaks the illusion Judai held that being the cold, unfeeling Supreme King was actually protecting him.
He is forced to see that his protection is just destruction.
So Judai wakes up from the nightmare. The Supreme King persona shatters in receipt. He regains his empathy, his horror at what he has done. He is saved from himself.
But the overarching threat hovering over this entire dimension hasn't gone anywhere.
Right, because his friend Johann, the very friend whose disappearance triggered this entire psychological collapse, is found alive. But the transcript reveals Johann is possessed.
And he is possessed by the very entity that started this entire cascade of tragedy back in Judai's childhood.
Yubel.
This brings us to the true bleeding heart of the narrative. Yubel isn't just a random evil spirit possessing people for the sake of gaining power. To understand this threat, we have to deeply examine the motivation.
We have to understand the why. And the motivation is where the story shifts from a psychological thriller into a genuinely jaw-dropping cosmic tragedy.
Yubel first possesses a character named Martin, uses him, and then jumps into Johann's body. They engage in this massive, earth-shattering clash.
Judai is fighting desperately with his rainbow dragon, while Yubel controls a grotesque, overwhelmingly powerful monster called Armityle.
Through a series of desperate maneuvers, Judai and his friends manage to save the alternate dimension from collapsing, but the cost is isolation.
Judai is left entirely alone in a desolate space to finally face Yubel one-on-one. And it is right here at the climax of the conflict that the sources drop a cosmic flashback that completely rewrites the entire context of their relationship.
This flashback is crucial. It expands the scope of the story from a childhood bedroom and a neighborhood playground to the literal origins of the universe itself.
It demands that we reevaluate everything we thought we knew about both characters. The text describes a past universe, an era long before they were reincarnated as a teenage boy, and a spirit trapped in a piece of cardboard.
In this ancient past life, the universe was governed by a nurturing, life-giving energy known as the gentle dark.
But this equilibrium was under constant existential threat from an overwhelming, annihilating force called the Light of Destruction.
In this era, Judai was not a normal boy. He was a young prince who harbored the dormant power of the Supreme King, a power that was destined to eventually save the universe from this incredible.
But the prince was young. His power was dormant. He was deeply vulnerable and needed a guardian to ensure he survived until he reached adulthood and could fulfill his destiny.
And here is the absolute gut punch of the entire transcript. Yubel, in this past life, was not a monster.
No. Yubel was human.
An ordinary human who cared deeply for the prince. And this human Yubel volunteered to undergo a hideous, agonizing physical and magical transformation.
The text specifically mentions the grotesque nature of this process, gaining scales and armor, having their humanity stripped away to become a literal terrifying monster, solely to possess the physical strength necessary to protect the young prince.
And the quote from Yubel during this flashback is just devastating. Facing this surgical, magical mutilation, Yubel simply says, "I don't care as long as I protect him."
This revelation changes the entire emotional landscape of the story.
What is so deeply fascinating is that we finally see absolute uncorrupted core of character.
It forces you to realize that every single terrifying action Yubel has taken throughout the entire narrative, from putting the neighborhood kids in comas to possessing Judai's friend to plunging entire dimensions into chaotic wars, is entirely driven by a foundation of love and profound sacrifice.
Yubel gave up their own humanity.
But I mean, the leap from "I will mutilate myself to protect you" to "I'm going to destroy all your friends and tear apart the universe" massive. It's so incredibly warped.
It really is.
How does a guardian driven by pure devotion become a force of absolute terror?
Well, the corruption of that love happens because two incredibly potent intersecting factors. First, we have the literal corrupting influence of the Light of Destruction that Yubel was exposed to while floating unprotected in the space capsule.
Right, it was a cosmic poison.
But second, and far more importantly from a psychological perspective, we have the profound, unbearable pain of abandonment. Remember the sequence of events.
Yubel sacrifices their humanity to protect Judai. In their reincarnated lives, Yubel continues to protect him, albeit aggressive.
And what is Yubel's reward? Judai packs Yubel into a capsule and shoots them into the freezing infinite void of space. He didn't mean it maliciously, but intention doesn't negate impact.
Let me make sure I'm tracing this logic correctly.
Yeah.
Yubel is sitting in the cold, dark void of space, suffering unimaginable agony from the light of destruction for years.
Yes.
And because Judai, the person Yubel loves more than anything in the universe, the person Yubel gave up their humanity for, is the one who sent them to this place of torment, Yubel's mind breaks. To rationalize the agony, Yubel has to change the very definition of love.
Precise. The cognitive dissonance is too great to bear. Yubel cannot accept the thought, Judai hates me, or Judai betrayed.
That would just break them completely.
Exactly. So the corrupted mind creates a new equation. Judai loves me. Judai caused me this excruciating. Therefore, this pain must be how he expressed love.
The psychological equation firmly becomes love equals pain.
Therefore, to show my internal, boundless devotion to Judai in return, I must inflict the maximum possible amount of pain upon him and the universe he inhabits.
To Yubel, destroying Judai's friends and tearing apart, his reality isn't an act of vengeance or hate. It is the ultimate cosmic expression of eternal devotion.
It is a terrifyingly pure, deeply traumatized logic.
It is the most tragic, devastating miscommunication I could possibly imagine in a narrative. The ultimate villain of the story, the terrifying monster that has caused all the suffering, is actually the hero's most devoted protector.
Driven completely mad by taking on the hero's suffering and then being abandoned in the dark.
So how in the world do you resolve that? You can't just throw a bigger fireball or punch a villain whose only actual crime was loving you too much and bearing the burdens you couldn't handle.
You cannot fight them. That is the genius of this resolution. Because fighting Yubel is just repeating the original sin.
It is rejecting that part of yourself once again.
It is violently pushing away your own trauma and the consequences of your own actions. To resolve this, you have to do the hardest, most counterintuitive thing imaginable. You have to integrate.
Which brings us to the absolute climax of the duel between Judai and Yubel. And what I genuinely believe is the most brilliant, narratively satisfying plot twist detailed in these sources.
Yubel's grand apocalyptic plan is finally laid bare.
Yeah, Yubel attempts to use a specific card combination activating chain material alongside superpolymerization. And the goal isn't just to win a game.
No. Yubel's goal is to literally fuse all 12 dimensions of their universe into a single, massive, apocalyptic.
In Yubel's corrupted mind, this is the ultimate romantic gesture, cementing their love in absolute mutual destruction so they can be together forever in a state of nothing where no one can ever abandon the other again.
It is the ultimate manifestation of a destructive trauma bond. The logic is, if we destroy everything, including ourselves, then nothing can ever hurt us or separate.
It is a desire for peace achieved through total annihilation, but Judai counters.
And the way he counters it is what elevates this entire story.
He doesn't counter it with a bigger laser beam or a stronger monster or a magical Deus Ex Machina. He reveals that he had already secretly activated his own trap card.
But instead of using it to destroy Yubel, to finally kill the monster that has tormented him, Judai takes control of the superpolymerization card.
And he uses it to fuse himself with Yubel.
This moment is a masterclass in representing psychological integration through visual media. Think about the journey of that card.
Throughout the alternate dimension arc, superpolymerization was the signature weapon of the Supreme King.
Right. It was the tool used to forcefully absorb others, to consume them in order to build impenetrable walls and gain cold, isolated power. It was a weapon of detachment.
But here, in this climax, Judai reclaims and repurposes. He uses it not to consume an enemy, but to wholly accept a broken, tormented part of his own soul.
The quotes transcribed from this moment are incredible. The dialogue is so rich.
Judai looks at Yubel, this terrifying, warped entity, and he says, "The sad journey of the soul has reached its term. The ones we have to fight are the light of destruction that warped your soul."
He completely validates Yubel. He stops calling Yubel a monster. He recognizes the outside forces, the cosmic trauma that hurt them both.
He's taking absolute, unconditional accountability.
He is essentially looking at his trauma and saying, I created this situation by abandonment. I am no longer going to run from my past.
I am no longer going to hide from my shadow self, punish pain you endured on my behalf. And then he delivers the line that finishes the conflict entirely.
He accepts the dormant, heavy power of the Supreme King that still resides within him.
And he willingly takes Yubel's spirit into his own body, declaring, "Even if my existence disappears, I don't care. I fuse myself and Yubel into one.
By fully consciously embracing the parts of himself that he had previously discarded or suppressed, his childhood trauma, his capacity for immense darkness, his crushing guilt, and his deeply damaged protector, the internal war finds.
He doesn't defeat the monster by slaying. He defeats the monster by embracing it and recognizing it as a part of him.
And by doing so, the two fractured, bleeding halves of his soul finally find equilibrium. And
It's beautiful.
if we step back from the cosmic scale of the story, the psychological application here is profound. Think about your own life, right? Think about your own personal Yubel.
We almost all have a toxic trait or an outdated emotional defense mechanism that developed when we were young.
Maybe it kept you safe during a chaotic childhood, but now in your adult life, it just causes chaos in your relationships or your career. You cannot just banish that trait.
You cannot just wish it away or try to ruthlessly suppress it because it will mutate and fight back harder.
You have to sit with it. You have to understand why it was created in the first place, validate the protection it tried to offer, and consciously integrate it into your whole adult self.
That is an incredibly powerful takeaway.
Yeah.
So the cosmic battle is won. The dimensions are saved from annihilation.
Judai returns to the normal physical world, materializing back at Duel Academy.
The dust settles, and you would think the story is over. He saved the universe. But here is where the narrative shifts gears in a way that is profoundly relatable.
The sources reveal that surviving a cosmic war against twisted gods and integrating your shadow self doesn't actually prepare you for the most terrifying monster.
Which is, of course, everyday reality.
Exactly.
The crushing, paralyzing anxiety of simply growing up. We enter the final phase, detailed in the transcript. It is a month after the cosmic battle. The students are back at school.
On the surface, things seem completely normal. They are laughing. They are taking their graduation photos.
But there is a new, insidious threat creeping into the academy. A former student named Fujiwara Yusuke returns to the school.
And Fujiwara is completely different from the cosmic threat. He has sacrificed his soul, enigmatic force literally called dark.
Notice the deliberate, jarring shift in the narrative scale here. We just went from the light of destruction tearing apart 12 alternate dimensions in cosmic apocalypse down to a guy named Darkness interrupting high school graduation photos.
It feels smaller. But psychologically speaking, the stakes for these specific characters are just as high, if not significantly higher, because the threat is intimately personal.
Because Darkness doesn't fight with cosmic lasers or by opening portals to other dimensions. As the text clearly shows, Darkness uses a much more insidious surgical weapon.
He uses the students' deep-seated, incredibly relatable, mundane anxieties about their own.
Darkness, in this narrative context, represents the paralyzing void of the unknown.
Think about the structure of a student's life. When you are in school, your path is entirely laid out for you. The track is clear.
Pass this specific test, win this specific match, get this grade, move to the next semester. There are rules and clear metrics for success.
But graduation is the end of the track. It is stepping off the map entirely into a dense, obscuring fog where there are no clear rules for how to succeed or be happy.
And the transcript breaks down exactly how Darkness weaponizes this fog against specific characters, and it serves as a brilliant character study.
First, we have Sho, who is also known as Cirrus in some English translations, and his relationship with his highly successful older brother, Ryo, or Zane.
Sho is attempting to use his older brother's signature Cyber Dark deck, but he is visibly crumbling. He feels completely, utterly inadequate.
He's buckling under the immense pressure of trying to live up to his brother's towering legacy, and he almost gives up entirely when confronted by the vision's dark.
What Sho is experiencing is the pure anxiety of comparison.
It is the suffocating fear that you will never be as good or as successful or as respected as the people who came before you. The fear that you are destined to be nothing more than a pale, disappointing imitation of your family.
But the narrative provides a mechanical and emotional breakthrough. Sho remembers a critical conversation with his brother.
His brother didn't give him the deck so he would just copy his moves. He explicitly told Sho that the deck wants to evolve.
And remembering this allows Sho to finally step out of the shadow. The transcript details this incredible sequence where Sho executes a combination using the card Power Bond and return from the different dimension.
Now the mechanics here, normally Power Bond is a massive risk. It doubles the attack of the monster create. But at the end of the turn, you, the player, take damage equal to that massive original attack.
It's a perfect metaphor for the painful, self-destructive pressure of trying to force a legacy. But Sho manages to use a zero-cost version of this combination.
He sheds the anxiety. He brings back banished resources and creates something new without suffering the self-damage.
He doesn't just mimic his brother. He innovates. He He accepts his brother's foundation, but he builds his own distinct future on top of it.
That is a brilliant translation of game mechanics into psychological. He overcomes the paralyzing anxiety of legacy, not by rejecting his family, but by choosing to evolve the legacy rather than simply attempting to replicate.
Then, on the other end of the anxiety spectrum, we have Manjum, or Chaz. His encounter with darkness is a pure, undiluted manifestation of imposter syndrome.
Darkness traps Manjum in a horrific vision of his future. In this vision, he has graduated, he has made it in professional dueling, and he completely spectacular.
Drops his cards during a match, crowd turns on him, he is a laughingstock, and his career is...
The text shows him physically paralyzed by the fear that all his bravado and confidence in high school was just a temporary illusion, and that the real world is inevitably going to expose.
Darkness is operating by stripping away their hope.
It whispers the exact, specific insecurities that our own inner critics whisper to us when we are lying awake at 3 in the morning.
It tells them that their adult lives will be full of failure, broken dreams, mediocrity, and humiliation.
It is the insidious voice that says, you have already peaked. High school was the best it's ever going to be, and everything from this point forward is a slow, humiliating decline.
When you look at it through that lens, the narrative structure is genuinely profound.
So what does this all mean?
It implies that after a person defeats literal God, survives grueling alternate dimension, and does the agonizing emotional work of integrating their deepest shadow self, the final boss they have to face, the ultimate hurdle before they can truly enter adulthood, is just everyday, mundane existential dread.
Because the reality is, you can be a hero who saves the universe, you can slay the dragon, but on Monday morning, you still have to figure out how to pay your rent.
Right. You still have to figure out how to succeed in your chosen career and how to find your meaningful place in a complex society.
Overcoming that paralyzing existential dread isn't a side. It is the absolute mandatory prerequisite for completing the final milestone.
Which brings us to the culmination of all these threads, the graduation ceremony.
It is graduation day at Duel Academy. The air is celebratory but heavy with finality.
The top-ranking students, Asuka, Manjum, and Sho, are offered an incredibly prestigious prize. They are offered a replica deck of the legendary king of games, Yugi.
In the context of their world, this is the highest possible honor. It is the ultimate validation.
But they decline it.
That refusal is a beautiful, quiet moment, true self-act.
The text notes the specific reason they give for declining the prize. They state that the best deck isn't some legendary pre-made artifact handed down from a famous figure.
The best deck, they realize, is the one that is deeply infused with their own memories, their own painful struggles, and their own personal growth.
They have finally learned to value their own authentic, messy journey over the shiny external validation.
They no longer feel the desperate need to borrow someone else's legend or hide behind someone else's accomplishment. They are finally confident enough to start writing their own.
But as the text poignantly points out, the students aren't the only ones struggling with the reality of letting go.
Right. We have to look at the adults in the room, specifically Professor Kronos.
He is the longtime teacher of these students, and Kronos actually has a breakdown of his own. He tries to literally stop the graduation ceremony from happening.
He acts out, causing a scene, because he simply cannot bear the thought of letting these students go. He loves them deeply, and the thought of the academy returning to an empty, quiet state without break.
So Judai steps. He challenges his teacher to duel one last, not to defeat him, but to help him process his grief and move on.
It is a profound, incredibly moving role reversal. The student, who has traversed the cosmos and integrated his own dark, is now gently helping the teacher transition into a new, difficult phase of life.
And the transcript highlights the deep nostalgia woven into the mechanics of this specific duel. Judai doesn't use his cosmic power or the Supreme King's fusion.
He uses his classic Day 1 combo, the field spell Skyscraper, and his signature monster, Flame.
This is exactly how he fought in the very first episode of his entire journey, and the mechanics of this combo are inherently meaningful.
Flamewing Man often has lower attack power than the opponent's monsters, but when Skyscraper is on the field, it gives a massive boost to a monster attacking a stronger opponent.
Furthermore, when Flamewing Man destroys a monster, it inflicts damage equal to the destroyed monster's attack. It is the ultimate underdog mechanic.
It says that with the right foundation, the right environment, you can overcome giants and turn their own massive strength them.
And through the physical act of this duel, Kronos experiences a profound emotional realization. He realizes that the educational relationship, the bond of mentorship, is never a one-way.
It is not just the students who learn and grow from the teachers, the mentors, the parents. They grow tremendously from the sheer act of guidance.
Kronos finally accepts a painful truth of parenthood and mentorship. Holding them back out of love is still holding them back. His job is done.
He must allow them to step forward into the world, even if it leaves him behind.
It beautifully paves the way for the actual ceremony to proceed. Asuka gives a sweeping, emotional, valedictorian speech.
She talks about how the bonds they've forged through all their countless battles and shared traumas will serve as the guiding light that gets them through the inevitable, unpredictable hardships of their adult lives.
It was a celebratory, triumphant moment. But while everyone is cheering, while the confetti is falling and the photos are being taken, Judai slips away.
He deliberately chooses not to stay for the party.
He leaves completely quietly. The text notes that he mentions he is going on a journey, wandering the world to find those who might desperately need the unique, heavy power he now wields.
He specifically avoids his friends. He doesn't want a tearful goodbye. He doesn't want the fanfare. He just packs a single bag and walks away from the academy.
And when you look back at where we started the hour, the contrast is staggering. He is no longer the carefree, desperate, latchkey kid who just loved playing games to avoid the terrifying silence of an empty house.
He is now a fused, complex, and he carries the traumatized soul of Yubel within him, carries the heavy, ruthless power of the Supreme King, and he bears a massive cosmic responsibility.
This raises an important question, though.
Does growing up, truly maturing, always require leaving a fundamental part of your childhood?
Judai's silent exit is profoundly melancholic, but when you look at the scope of his journey, it is entirely necessary. He simply cannot stay in the academy. The halls are too small for him.
He has fundamentally outgrown the space that nurtured. He is walking into the vast, unknown expanse of adult entirely on his own terms.
He isn't running from his path. He is carrying the full heavy weight of his trauma, his mistakes, and his integrated shadow with him, letting it guide his future rather than dictate it.
It is an absolutely incredible narrative arc.
Let's synthesize the sheer scope of the journey we've been on today. We started by looking at a desperate Hebrew creator pleading with us to understand how to pronounce a misunderstood monster's name.
We learn that true names hold power, and to misunderstand the name is to misunderstand the soul.
That phonetic plea led us into exploring a lonely boy's desperate coping mechanism and his terrifying descent into a ruthless shadow self-born of the crushing guilt of leadership.
We dissected the mechanics of how we build walls and how those walls are shattered. We discovered a cosmic tragedy spanning universes where pure love was corrupted by isolation and pain into an apocalyptic threat.
We watched teenagers fight their own existential imposter syndrome, realizing that the fear of the future is as dangerous as any.
And finally, we watched them graduate, leaving the structured safety of school for the complex, unforgiving, and profoundly beautiful reality of adulthood.
The layers of psychological meaning woven into these sources are genuinely extraordinary. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you step back into your...
Through all the intense battles and cosmic threats we discussed, we saw that Judai's greatest, most transformative victory wasn't overpowering Yubel with a stronger weapon or a better strategy.
The sources show us quite clearly that the greatest strength a person can possess doesn't come from forcefully defeating your inner demons with a sharper sword.
True strength, the kind that actually brings lasting peace, comes from having the terrifying, immense courage to look directly at the darkest, broken, violently defensive parts of yourself and saying, I understand why you hurt, let's become one.
So I ask you to consider your own internal landscape. What would happen if, instead of constantly exhausting yourself, fighting your own anxieties about the future, or trying desperately to banish your inner darkness to the void, what if you actually pulled out a chair, sat down at the table, and finally listened to what they are desperately trying to protect you from?
That is a deeply challenging question, and one that I think will stay with me and hopefully with you for a very long time.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden philosophical depths of a story that proved to be so much more than just a game. Remember to keep questioning the surface-level labels you see, keep striving to learn the true, complex names of things, and as always, keep diving deep.